Okay, back, and now we're looking at the rear gear house. Now this is one of these pieces that's a lot trickier than it might look. I mean, to a lot of people it looks tricky, and it is, but it's really important that this is aligned perfectly. So I mean, with the crown and pinion, of course, onto here, and we're talking in both this direction and that direction. There we go, that's better. There's a couple of bronze bushes to make as well, down in there. There's one in that side, it's down in that hole. That's usually sloppy as hell. You can see there's one in there. We have to knock that out and make a new one and test it by putting that down in there, and it just wobbles around. And there's also one on the pressure plate on the back of this in here, which pushes onto the back of the crown. So first things, of course, I'm gonna have to clean this up. I've cleaned it once already because it had been left in water annoyingly, so it was pretty bad shape. But I'm gonna have another quick go over it, make sure there's no loose bits, and tidy up some of the aluminium in there again, and then get to work making some new bits. We've got a couple of cross threads as well on the back of this, a lot of corrosion. Got the original old metal framed oil seals, which I've got new ones down here. Right, let's get to work. So I think first up I'm going to fix the bronze pinion bush that goes in there. You can see how bad it is. So obviously there's no point aligning the pinion and crown wheel when that's just going to slop around. There's a nice little hole there. I'll show you there for knocking it out. So I'm going to try and get that, heat it up first, I think, bash it out and see if we can get that out. Alright, I've been mucking around with this for the last half an hour, and as you can see, if you look down there, it looks like somebody has hammered 3 or 4 steel washers down in there, having not had a piece of bronze or something. So I've been trying to get the damn things out, which is not going to be easy because they seem to be wedged solid and they just rotate when you heat it, which is a bit annoying. They don't drop out at all. So anyway, have a go at that. Right, I made this little tool here with a hook on it, bashed it with a hammer, mole grips on the end, and here's all the trash that's come out of it. It almost looks like some kind of strange little bearing, but I don't think it was. And that bit of bronze from the bottom. Still one more bit in there though. Okay, now to the rear bearing housing plate. So we've got a bearing in that side, another one of those pesky metal oil seals in the other. We need to undo this as well, which adjusts the bronze pressure plate which pushes onto the back of the crown wheel. So I've just bent the tang over there. I'm just going to bash this bearing straight through now. I was hoping that would come out of there quite easily, but it's not going to, with a little tap, so I'm just going to get the bearing pullers. There's actually a nice lip under here to grab hold of. If you look on this side, you can also, I'll try and show you there, it just says plus, GF plus, which I think is the Swiss manufacturing company George Frank, and most, I think, of the Zundapp original parts, or a lot of them, have got GF stamped on them like that. 20 minutes of messing around, I'm nearly there. You can see how much, just to make out there, that bearing is completely rusted in there. That's that cleaned up. It's as good as I'm going to get it anyway without spending years on it. As you can see, it's pretty beaten up, this. It's got a lot of water and sort of corrosion damage to it and a few other things, so it's had a hard life. What I want to check now is obviously the threads, and you can, the easiest quick way to do that, I guess, is look, this one. You just wobble it in, so without even turning it, so you can see down in there. There you go. There's not much thread left. So I think what I'm going to do is just run a tap down each one, see which one's grip tight enough and which ones I'm going to have to repair. There's a few different ways to repair these. You can either use inserts, melt a bit of aluminium down in there and re-drill it and tap it, or you could use JB Weld if just a few of the threads have gone straight down the bottom. It's just a real assessment of how hard these are going to hold, and likewise for this. And then I'm going to block sand these surfaces, just reface those a bit on both sides, and then if I flip it over, just check all the threads around here as well, and again block sand any surfaces that are going to be mating surfaces for gaskets and stuff like that. All the parts cleaned up and the faces smoothed off as best as I can get them, and I've manufactured a new phosphor bronze bush to go in there, and this is PB102 bronze, and I cleaned up the end of this, and I've also cut a couple of oil or 4 oil grooves in it just to encourage oil flow into the bushing there. So all I need to do now is start assembling it, and start by pushing this in there. Right, so I've pushed that in there, that went in fine, and if you notice, just try and get that, I've left it 0.1 proud. So there's a bit of calculating to do, just to make sure you get it right on machining, and it's 0.1 proud of the metal surround. So that should fit down there. Absolute treat. There you go. There's no play on it at all, hardly, but it turns absolutely fine. Okay, so the bearings are in, or the bearing is in, and the oil seal there. So with this part, I just had that one in the freezer. I've warmed this one up in the oven to get the bearing nice and equal, and then you should be able to just push them together, so that won't be a problem. So just before we move on though, it's worth noting to make sure you clear out that oil hole, and see down in it where the oil will flow to the back of that. Make sure it's all nice and clear and there's a decent flow, because you do not want that seizing up, of course. Right, onto the bearing. There you go, and that's that done. You can see the ice on that, look. Piece of cake. So I've had to make a slight change to this, took it all apart again, because the hub carrier sat slightly under this lip, which is a bit weird. So I've put in a 0.5mm shim down there on the edge of the bearing, just under that oil seal. So hopefully this will now sit a bit further out than it did. And I've also had to turn this down. This was slightly out of alignment, which seems to be common. Wasn't quite round. You can see it was scuffing the inside of that. And it's no surprise that we've run into another problem. So it's hard to do this one-handed, but it's nice and loose there. As soon as I go in any further, it gets tight. It's got like a stiff spot. So I'm thinking that little bit there, I think, is probably slightly bigger than that. I won't be able to see it, I don't know. So I'm going to check that on the lathe quickly. You can actually hear it. So there's just a little tadge on the end there. So I just want to take that down. I guess the bronze bushing was probably a bit more accurate than perhaps it needed to be. That fixed that little problem. Nice and easy. much better. So before we start gear alignment, make sure the gasket's on. So when you put these two pieces together, you want the right spacing and tighten them up. Make sure you got your bronze. This is PB102 again, so it's phosphor bronze. Make sure that's in there, and you can just calculate the put the crown wheel on before, and just measure the gap between it there. Make sure you've got one that's roughly the right size, and then just make that about 1/2 mil smaller, so you've got a little bit of adjustment on the other end. That should then fit okay. There you go. So just wind that out in a minute. Drop on the securing ring and the big nut again with the recess on that side. Tighten that down by hand for the moment before we go on to the next bit. Okay, so just when I thought all the problems are gone, I've got another problem, and that I don't think that gap between there, that this old disused propeller oil flicker thing is big enough, because when you put that in there, obviously you measure the depth of that bearing and then the depth of this housing. You should be able to just shim this by a little tiny amount to get it right, bearing in mind the gasket that will go on there. But there's actually a big old difference between the two already. It's about 4 mil, so there's no way you're supposed to shim that. And I'm pretty sure that that is not big enough there, or it's completely worn out. And I've got a photograph of one here, and it looks, there we go, it looks about the same size as this bearing, and this one isn't. It's quite a lot smaller, so I think I'm going to make a spacer for that. Okay, so that's all back together, and don't make the same mistake I did. And I put this together and thought, oh, for sake, and I thought that's not long enough. And I thought about it for 5 minutes. I thought, I'm going to have to move this pinion back. But then, hang on a minute, it suddenly occurred to me, I was just being an idiot, because I forgot that these two are different, aren't they? So don't make the same mistake. When you haven't looked at them for a couple of years, you can see that they are different. It's the internal one there with the oil grooves in it. There we go. That now fits perfectly. What we need to do now is have a look and see what kind of wear pattern it has. Okay, so need to examine the contact pattern. So get some of this marking stuff. I made this myself, which I'll do a short on at some point. And just coat the teeth. Won't go into too much detail about this because enough videos around for it, but you know as well as I that if you're going to do this, you need to examine the contact pattern, or this is going to last about 5 minutes. Surprising actually, if that's even slightly out, just how hot the rear housing and everything gets really quickly. So there we go. Get all that on both sides ideally, so that you can look at the opposite side and you back off the throttle. Don't need to do all of them, but that'll do for now. And then I'm just going to bolt it together and twist it round whilst holding the bit of resistance there, like you would if it was under load on the road. Once it's all screwed together, we can give them a few turns. Grip that end. Get a bit of load on it. Right, so I pulled it apart, and the wear pattern's actually pretty good. You can see it there, it's uniform across the teeth. And on the back, it's okay, it's more on the heel than the toe, which is normal in the idle. And once you're happy with your contact pattern, remember just to get in there just bash a screwdriver in there to dent that. That's the securing washer, stops that coming undone. To be fair, I don't think it comes undone anyway, because the bearing sits on top of here, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Right, I'm just looking at the drive shaft. As always, this is rusted solid. So the only way I'm going to get that off is to heat it up. There you go, after a bit of jiggery pokery and a bit of heat, that's cleaned up quite nicely.